You are listening to the Navigating Adult ADHD podcast with your ADHD coach and expert, Zena. Hello, my sparkly brain friend. I am so happy to be here with you. Thank you for pushing play on this episode. And I am so glad that you did, because this is such an important thing. And we need to be talking about this more. We need more awareness, more understanding around iron levels and ADHD. Because, my friend, this is huge. Okay? Iron plays a big role in dopamine regulation. So, iron is essential for producing and regulating dopamine. Now, we already know that as ADHDers, we have less dopamine happening, less dopamine circulating in our brain, okay? So low iron equals less dopamine, even less, right? Equals worsened ADHD symptoms, things like inattention, impulsivity, and mood swings, okay? And iron is also essential in the production of serotonin. Serotonin is another brain chemical that feels really fucking good, all right? It is a good feeling brain chemical. It is something that people with ADHD also have lower levels of. We have less of this in our brain. And it plays a big role in feelings of contentment, right? How content you feel, and also in mood. So the other thing that iron plays a big role in is something called GABA, right? Which I just want you to think of that as like your brain's natural calming agent. So, studies have shown, there are studies out there, we need more, but there are studies already out there that show a large percentage of people with ADHD have low iron levels, okay? So, I'm going to start this episode by saying I am not a doctor. I am not a medical professional whatsoever. This episode is only intended to help educate you and to help you understand what might be happening in your body as it relates to iron and ADHD. This is not intended to replace any medical advice, okay? Good. I'm glad we got that out the way. So, iron deficiency can lead to poor concentration, brain fog, low mood, fatigue, right? And many other things that we're going to talk about. Many things that those of us with ADHD experience, okay? So low iron can quite literally mimic ADHD symptoms, and it can make them worse, like way worse. And women, right? Anybody who has a period, who menstruates, we are at higher risk of having an iron deficiency, okay? Due to, yes, the menstruation, the pregnancy, but also our dietary patterns. I found that one so interesting. We eat differently to men, and therefore we typically have less iron that we are getting, okay? And iron is often missed in women. This deficiency is missed, right? Because of symptoms like, brain fog and fatigue and low mood, they're often attributed to either our ADHD or our hormones, of course. But it might not be the hormones. It might not be the ADHD. It might be iron, or it could be a combination of those. And iron could be one of those things. Okay, so my friend, you bet your ass we are talking today about all things iron and ADHD. Because my friend, this is something that we need to know about. It is something that could make a huge impact on our ADHD symptoms, on how we feel, on our ability to thrive. So if you have someone in your life, anyone who has ADHD, please send them this episode, because it could quite literally be life-changing. Please send it to them, okay? So, in our episode today, we are going to dive into symptoms of low iron, right? So what to look for, especially those that actually overlap with ADHD. And often you're just going to attribute this to your ADHD or maybe to your hormones, okay? We're going to talk about why low iron levels are often missed. We're going to dive into a little bit of the research that shows that people with ADHD are more likely to have lower levels of iron, right? We're going to talk about how to get your levels tested and why a typical blood test just ain't going to cut it. Okay? This is very different from anemia. Okay? If you've got anemia, you definitely have got, worsened symptoms. But often it's not anemia. Okay? We're going to talk about that and what to look for, what you need to know. We're also going to explore why this is even more important for women, right? And anyone who has a cycle and menstruates. And why too much iron can also be problematic. So, my friend, you do not want to blindly go and just buy some supplements off the internet, right, without getting your levels tested and speaking to your medical professionals. Okay? So, when you think of someone who is iron deficient, you might think of anemia, okay? Or you might just kind of picture somebody who is like really pale and really tired. Well, think again. So there was a 2004 study published in the archives, I think, of pediatric and adolescent medicine. Yeah. And it found that 84% of children with ADHD, 84% had significantly lower levels of iron, compared with only 18% of kids without ADHD. That's a massive difference. Now, I appreciate this is a study on children, and yes, we will get to adults, but there is actually a lot more research available on children, right? And this study demonstrates very powerfully just how, easily we are overlooked when we are seeming to function, right? Or perhaps those children are more hyperactive, right? We're functioning, we're hyperactive, whatever. So we are often overlooked. So there was another study that found a similar correlation between low iron levels and increased ADHD symptoms in adults, which also indicated that optimizing iron levels could be a very effective strategy. Now, before you go out and buy the iron supplements or start eating steak, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? I want you to keep listening to this episode because, like I said, too much iron can also be problematic. We never want to start the iron supplements without a blood test and your doctor's approval, okay? So, let's talk about some of these symptoms of low iron that overlap with ADHD. So for adults, this can look like persistent anxiety. Hello. Low mood. Hi. Poor concentration. Or a sense of being like emotionally flat or foggy. Okay, like that brain fog. Now, those are all things that those of us with ADHD often experience, right? Fatigue. Low energy, increased irritability. Hi, I'm looking at me, right? Now, restless leg syndrome, like having restless legs or sleep issues. So restless legs is like an uncomfortable tingling or crawling feeling in the legs, right? You might find that you move your legs or your feet a lot. For me, I'm forever moving my toes. And the other day, one of the cats attacked my feet when I was sitting on the bed because I was moving and wiggling my toes constantly. I didn't even notice I was doing it. Right? But restless legs usually will affect a person's ability to sleep. And I recently had a client share with me how restless legs is something she has struggled with for years. And she said within a couple of weeks of starting her iron supplements, she got her levels tested and she was lower than optimal. Within a couple of weeks of starting them, she said it was gone. Her restless legs was gone. I was like, that is wild. Like wild. Right? Now, I'm going to quote Dr. Libby, who is the author of the book, Fix Iron First. She says, you don't need to have full-blown anemia for these symptoms to appear. Even mild depletion can have a noticeable impact, especially if it is layered with stress, with sleep disruptions, or hormonal shifts. Low iron is frequently missed, or its effects are blamed on everything else, on stress, on hormones, on being busy, or simply a personality difference. But when iron levels are restored gently and properly, right, with the right form and the right cofactors, your body needs to be able to absorb it and use it, right? The difference can be profound. Okay, so again, that is a quote from Dr. Libby. Now, these symptoms that we just went through, right, of course, they are going to make ADHD like so much worse. Like we're going to fire up our symptoms. We're going to make the challenges of functioning with a brain that's already wired differently way harder to navigate if we have low iron. And, right, these low iron levels, right, these symptoms that we just explored, they can literally mimic ADHD symptoms, right? So somebody who doesn't have ADHD will look like they have ADHD quite possibly in this instance. Or, right, somebody who hasn't yet been diagnosed, it's going to turn up the dial. So I spent a bit of time researching this because I wanted to see what's out there, and there is not enough out there, right? So I'm going to be loud as fuck about this, right? But in researching this episode, I found a very large thread on Reddit, which was super interesting to hear about people's experiences. And somebody said, I wish I had known my whole life that low ferritin, right, which we're going to talk about, low ferritin, iron deficient, not anemia in my case, can exacerbate ADHD symptoms, right? When we have low ferritin levels, which is one of the things we want to check for when we get our iron tested, don't worry, I'm going to talk about that, it can literally fire up your ADHD symptoms, make them so much worse. I struggle to say that word, exacerbate, like, it just doesn't sound right. I really struggle with that. Like, I've got it like in my notes here on the screen, and I'm like, I'm just not going to say that one. So, all right. The question is, how do we test our iron levels? What do we need to know? What do we need to do, y'all? Okay, first of all, we need to understand that a standard blood test that our doctor will typically run is not going to cut it, okay? So often in conventional medicine, right, in order to check a patient's iron status, what they will do is a CBC, which stands for a complete blood count. That ain't going to cut it. Unless you've got anemia, that ain't going to pick up what we're looking for here, right? In order to fully assess our iron levels and our iron status, it is critical that we look beyond the CBC, okay? We need to do a more comprehensive evaluation, right? Something that includes a full iron panel. Now, I'm going to rattle off a bunch of medical terms, and I'm going to tell you that you don't need to remember them, and I'll tell you why in a minute, okay? So, we want to do a full iron panel that assesses our serum iron, our total iron binding capacity, which is called TIBC, and our iron saturation, and our ferritin levels. Now, ferritin, right, remember the ferret? Ferret, right, just remember that, ferret, right, those little animals that are big and like furry and long and, I don't know, slither around kind of like a snake, you know, a ferret, right? Ferritin, that's the one we want to remember because that is super important because it reflects the body's stored iron and it can be a more sensitive marker of having an iron deficiency, right? So that is one that is super, super important, ferritin, okay? Now, like I said, you do not need to remember everything I just said, okay? What you want to do instead is you want to get yourself the cheat sheet for this episode where I have written it down and you can quite literally have it in front of you, all right? I've got the link here in the show notes, right? navigatingadultadhd.com/cheat sheet, right? Just get the PDF. It's totally free for this episode. I have the steps written down. I have the tests written down, okay? Super easy. That's the only thing you need to remember. Okay? So, one study I read showed that lower levels of ferritin, right? Again, that's like a protein found inside the cells that stores the iron. Okay? The lower the levels of ferritin, right, the more severe the symptoms. The way I picture this in my brain is the less ferrets running around in my blood, the worse my ADHD, right? I need more ferrets in my blood. This is how I picture it, okay? So, if you are frustrated when your blood work comes back and says normal, my friend, dig deeper, okay? Because it's likely that the blood panel. It's likely that the blood work you had done was that CBC, right? Just just not going deep enough. I was having this conversation with a friend of mine, Kate, the other day. And we were talking, she's a nurse, and we were talking about this, and I was talking about like the iron and, how fascinating it is and all of this. And she said it's so good that there's more awareness being raised, etc. And she said to me that, what is considered normal iron levels is not optimal. And she explained this so well. She said, when people come into the doctor and they get some blood work done, they're typically not well. They're coming in because they have less energy. They're not feeling well. Something's not right? So the blood work that is being done is for people who are not well, who are not feeling great, who are unhealthy, whatever, right? And then all of that blood work is what they use to kind of get an average. And if you're below average, right, then they will say, well, that's not optimal, right? But the average is being measured off sick people, not off people who are healthy and well and functioning great, right? So normal does not mean optimal. It is not the same thing. And I was like, oh my God, that makes so much sense. Thank you, Kate, right? So I think anyone with ADHD, like this is my personal recommendation, anyone with ADHD should get their iron levels tested, right? I'm in the process of doing mine again now, right? But if you are someone who is in burnout, who is experiencing chronic fatigue, right, who is really struggling with ADHD symptoms of any kind, go get your levels tested, right? There is no harm in getting it done. I don't know about you, but I hate blood tests. I fucking hate them. So that part's scary. But if it's going to make a difference, it's going to be so worth it. All right. So here's what to do. All right. 3 steps. Step 1, ask your GP for a comprehensive iron test. Not just a general iron panel, right? Specifically, we need the ferritin, right? We need to know how many ferrets are running around in our blood, okay? That measures your iron storage levels, which can be low, even if your basic iron looks normal, okay? So this is very important, okay? Now, some GPs might push back on running these tests. If that is the case, you can do it yourself through other companies throughout New Zealand, throughout the world, etc. Okay, I know in Dr. Libby's book, she did mention one. I don't know what the company was, I'm sorry. But if you look at that book, it will tell you in there, there are companies, and you could just Google this, that will, again, you could get your own tests done through privately, okay? So step 1, ask your GP for a comprehensive iron test, right? Step 2, get the results. Now, ideally, ferritin should be at least 70 to 100 ng or ml, right? But 70 to 100 is the numbers that we're looking for. That is for optimal function. We're not looking for in range, okay? I believe, and don't quote me on this, but I believe if it's 20 or lower, that's considered anemic, right? But we are looking for optimal function, okay? 70 to 100 is what we want, okay? Now, step 3, if you are lower or higher than 100, because higher is also problematic, right? But if you are lower than 70, right, talk to your GP or your pharmacist about the best supplement option. Now, iron can be tricky to absorb, and it can also be kind of rough on the gut, I have learned. So the type and the timing matters. So you definitely want to speak to someone about this. Now, one thing I have learned is you do not take iron supplements at the same time that you drink your coffee. It's going to cancel that shit right out, okay? Do it separately, right? Now, while you can boost your iron levels through foods, right? So often when I think of that, I think of red meat, chicken, dark leafy greens, chickpeas, that sort of thing, right? The reality is, and this is what I've learned from the studies, from the research, also it's mentioned in Dr. Libby's work, right? Most of us are not consuming enough iron through food alone, particularly women, okay? Especially with women in the ways in which we tend to eat, right? Or diet, right? Therefore, if you are low, do discuss supplement options. And it could quite likely just be a temporary thing, right? But do discuss those options with your GP, your medical professional, whoever, right? Like I said, there are lots of different supplements available, So it's really important that you speak to somebody about this. And the only one that I have had clients provide feedback on, I haven't yet had this experience myself, but clients have provided feedback on one called BioBlend's Iconic Iron. Now, this is not an ad for them, right? It's not even a recommendation, but the people who have told me that that is the one they have used have had very positive experiences and noticed differences. Okay? So I'm just going to put that in there for you, right? Now, more iron, hear me when I say this, my friend, more iron is not always better, okay? If you have too much iron in your blood, I can't remember the name of the condition. I also couldn't pronounce it. I remember that. But there is a condition where you have too much, iron levels in your, etc. That is also problematic and can at the same time increase ADHD symptoms. It could have the same effect when you have too much. Okay, so too much is not always better. Okay, if we have too much iron in too large quantities, iron in the body can oxidize or rust. Okay, so iron overload can be just as harmful as a deficiency. Okay, so again, this is why we don't want to blindly start supplementing our iron without the proper testing and supervision and all of that. It can be dangerous. Okay, again, iron levels need to be carefully balanced. Too high is bad. Too low is bad. All right, now I'm going to say it one last time. Again, my friend, I am not a doctor, okay? I am an ADHD coach who is obsessed, I'm talking fucking obsessed, with learning everything that I can to help our ADHD brains feel better and function better, okay? So always check with your medical professionals. Now, if you want to nerd out a bit on this whole iron thing, because honestly, I think it's huge, right? Dr. Libby Weaver has her new book that has recently come out called Fix Iron First. Okay. And that goes through in depth talking about how common this is, especially in women, right? And also how to interpret your results properly, all of that. Okay. So just to be clear, low iron does not cause ADHD, but it can make your symptoms worse. So if you are really struggling, if you've been feeling extra flat, if you've had constant anxiety, if you've been very foggy or just not yourself, my friend, it is so worth getting tested. All right. I would also love to hear from you and your experiences of getting tested and, increasing your levels and what you find out. And I would love for you to share this episode with anyone else who has ADHD, because we need to be talking about this more. We need to, help other people with this knowledge. So please go and share this with a friend. All right. Huge love. Take care out there. I will speak to you soon. Hey friend, if you want some more help navigating and thriving with ADHD and some help applying everything that you're learning here on the podcast, then head over to our website, navigatingadultadhd.com.